Okay, so got your unit exam coming up on Monday here. Hopefully you've had a chance to look through the review package that I gave you the other day. Big things for biology, okay? You study for bio a lot different than you studied for chem. Okay? Chemistry is very much a skill-based science where you needed to practice your skills, balancing equations, writing formulas, okay? Predicting products, mole equations, stuff like that. You had to practice those skills. The skills in bio are much different. Okay? The skills in bio are mostly, can I remember all of the facts that I need to remember, and then how can I figure out ways Mr. Coder will try to trick me with them? And I'm only being somewhat facetious when I say that. Okay? What you have to think of is, I know the stuff, I know what the parts of the cell do, I know how osmosis works or diffusion works, okay? Things like that. What kind of questions is Mr. Coder going to ask? Okay? How is he going to ask me how well I know this stuff? All right? The answer to that is that sometimes, like in a multiple choice question, it might just be fact checking. Okay, I might just be saying, hey, structure number 1 in that cell is what? Or what does it do? Okay, that's just fact checking. That's just knowledge stuff. So in that case, as many times as you can review something, the better. All right, commit it to memory. There's also going to be application type of questions, right, where you're going to have to go, all right, I know that a plant transports water in this way, so in this situation, why is a plant going to have trouble? Okay, or is a plant going to have trouble in this situation? So it's, I understand how this works, I know the facts, and now I can explain to Mr. Coder that I know how this would work given a new situation that maybe I haven't dealt with before. All right, does everyone follow me there? Because sometimes when this exam is over, I have people say to me, Mr. Coder, you never taught me that. And my answer to that is, you're absolutely right. But I taught you the stuff you needed to know to answer it, okay? That means sometimes I'm going to ask you something that you're going to have to formulate or synthesize an answer from what you know. So it may not be something we outright talked about in class. There aren't that many surprises. I'll be perfectly honest with you. There are not that many surprises. But okay, you might encounter a question where you're like, I don't remember talking about that, but I remember talking about this thing, and that applies to this. That's where you need to go. You guys kind of follow that? Okay, that's the kind of thinking that needs to go on in studying for biology. So yes, review. Okay, make sure you know all the facts, and then look at the practice test that I gave you. Gives you a few examples of ways I've asked those kind of application or evaluation kind of questions in the past. Okay, but that's what you got to think about is put a plant in a situation and see if you can think up how it would adapt or react to that, okay? Or a cell in a certain situation, how would it adapt or react? Things like that, okay? The more of those you can come up with, the better prepared you'll be for any surprises, okay? All right. First thing we talked about in this unit was cell theory. Okay, and the cell theory had 3 points. That seems to lend itself very nicely to a multiple choice question. Which of the following is not part of the cell theory, as there are usually 4 options, okay, in a multiple choice question. So, you certainly need to know the 3 points of the cell theory. I'm not going to ask you to write them out, okay? I'm not going to have a 4-mark question on the written response that says, please regurgitate the points of the cell theory onto paper for me, because I don't care, okay? I'm not going to ask that. I'm going to ask you what the points are, but I'm not going to make you write them out. Okay, so know the points. Which is the most important point? Which one did we deal with the most? Nope. Right. Cells carry out the basic functions, the second point of the cell theory. So the first point is the one Blaise mentioned, okay, which is that all living organisms are made up of cells. Okay, that was kind of the thing that defined life for us. If it's living, it's got cells. Okay. The second point is, what do cells do? Cells carry out the basic functions, and that came up several times throughout this unit. Okay, is that cells carry out the basic functions? They have to do certain things. Okay, what are those basic functions? Okay, we got to know that. We got to know what those basic functions are, because there's probably going to be questions that'll ask us to apply our knowledge of how cells work. All right, and if you think that a question's about this point of the cell theory, mention it. All right, it was part of your cell anatomy lab. Okay, it's part of all the stuff we talked about in plants. Right, cells carry out the basic functions. Well, in the leaf, the palisade layer carries out mostly photosynthesis, and that's providing food for the plant. That's a basic function. Meanwhile, the cells in the xylem are making sure that water comes up the plant. They're adapted to do that. Okay, and so as a result, they're specialized. They're carrying out a basic function. Okay, cells are specialized in multicellular organisms to work on one specific function as opposed to all. Right? Everybody follow me there? Okay, so basic functions, that's the really big one. Okay, and then obviously the last one is that cells divide to reproduce. There's not a cell factory anywhere. All right? So know those, and I might have a multiple choice question about Hooke, Leeuwenhoek, or Schleiden and Schwann. Okay, and there's only 4 names to remember, and Schleiden and Schwann go together, so it's really like one name. Okay, so if you just remember what each of them did, kind of briefly, there could be a multiple choice question that's a fact checker on that. Okay. Second thing that we talked about in this unit, okay, is we talked about the microscope. Now, I'm not going to make you label a microscope. Okay, if you know how to use a microscope, I'm happy with that. Okay, if you're, you take the whatchamacallit and you put it in the thingamadoodle. You know how to use it, I'm okay with that. Okay, you don't need to know the names of all the parts. But what you do need to be able to do is estimate the size of an object that you might be viewing. That was something we struggled with a little bit when we were doing our lab diagrams. Okay, it'd be very easy for me to throw a picture on a test and say, here's an organism, and you're looking at it on high power, and put a circle there that represents your field of view and say, how big is it? Right? That's a pretty easy multiple choice question, okay, for me to give you. So be aware of that. Probably format of lab drawings, I would say, would also be important. Okay, name and date, top right corner, right? Title down below with size and magnification, labels all to one side. Okay, all of that kind of stuff. Make sure that we understand how that works, and to an extent, how the microscope works too, because that was part of the analysis for the microscopy lab. We talked about how lenses change the path of light. Okay, could be multiple choice questions about that. Okay, sorry, back to cell theory here. This basic functions thing, I said this, but I didn't write it down. Okay, could be used to explain some written response items. So it could be part of your answer for a couple of written response items. So always keep that one in mind. Third thing we talked about. Modes of nutrition. Okay, and modes of nutrition ties back into basic functions of the cell. All right. If you are a photoautotroph, one of your basic functions is photosynthesis. If you are a chemoheterotroph, one of your basic functions is digestion of food. All right. As a result, you may need to have specialized organelles, okay, that carry out those basic functions. So certainly know the proper terms. Okay. Photoautotroph, chemoheterotroph. Make sure you know those terms, okay, so that you could use them correctly in a written response item, or that you would recognize them in a multiple choice question. Okay, so we got to make sure that we know those, and obviously how they differ, but also how they're similar. So we might want to write in there compare and contrast. Okay, remember that we said they got lots of similarities. We talked about that several times. They have lots of similarities because basic functions of the cell are often similar. Transport, okay, breakdown of sugar, excretion of wastes, okay, how the membrane works, all of that stuff. There's similarities, but there are some obvious differences. So that all tied in kind of in that lesson there. It's lesson 4. Okay. In that lesson, we also labeled the cells. Okay, that was where I gave you your cell diagrams and we went through the labeling of them. Should you expect to see a diagram of a cell on the unit exam? If you don't think you're going to get one, you are crazy. Okay, there's definitely a diagram of a cell on the test. You will not have to label all 12 parts. Okay, only 5. But of course, you don't know which 5 I'm going to ask or which cell I'm going to put on there. Right, so make sure you know both. Good news is they're, what, 80%, 85% similar. Okay, so most of them are overlapping. So make sure you know parts of the cell and what they do. Brief description, okay? It doesn't need to be a big, long paragraph answer. It can be like the answers you used on the quiz, like Golgi excretes wastes, you know, like it can be pretty simple answers for that. Okay. Fourth thing was the really big lesson. Okay, functions of the cell, functions of organelles actually. Okay, so what each organelle did. You're definitely going to need to know that. It's part of the labeling. Okay, function of organelles and cellular transport. If there's one lesson that has got more marks on the test than any other by a rather significant margin, it's that one. All right, we talked about a lot of things in that unit. Okay, or in that lesson, sorry. We talked about the functions of the organelles, and obviously that's important. But even more important than that is cell transport, because cell transport methods like osmosis and diffusion also applied when we talked about plants. A multicellular organism uses the same processes. So we've got to be able to explain how each of the big 3 work. Okay, what were the big 3? Candy? Osmosis, diffusion, and active transport. Okay, we got to know how all of those work, right? Because I will ask you in the written response several questions. Several written response items are about cellular transport. Okay. All right, which one is used most often? Diffusion, okay? Diffusion's probably the most important one. It came back after we talked about it. We did an activity where we illustrated that cells can only get so big because diffusion is the main way to transport materials within the cell. All right, so you probably would want to review how this relates to cell size. All right, that was the cube lab that we did, okay, on cell transport. So make sure you can tie that in with this. The properties of diffusion are this. Diffusion does this. It's passive. It's not targeted. It moves from high to low. This is how that affects cell size. That's one of those things I was telling you about right there at the beginning. Take what you know and apply it to another concept. Okay? Tell me how these two things are related, how they affect each other. That's the gist of bio. Okay? Memorize all the facts and then figure out how to apply them. All right. Okay. So yeah, remember all that stuff. So its effect on cell size is passive, moves down the gradient. Okay. What about osmosis? What's unique about osmosis? Water only, right? Okay. Is it within the cell or across the membrane? Across the membrane, right? And why does it go across the membrane? Jared? Right. Balance. Salts. Okay. The salts don't move. The water moves. Okay. There's more salt on the inside of the cell than outside. Water moves into it, right? Okay. If there's more salt outside, water moves out of the cell, okay, in an attempt to balance the concentrations. The salt does not move across the membrane as easily as water. That's why osmosis happens, right? Again, look for an application kind of question here. Okay, I put a cell or a multicellular organism in a certain situation. Okay, you'd need to be able to identify, okay, it's probably going to be osmosis in this question, or it's going to be active transport in this question, and here's what's going to happen, right? So you read the situation and you figure out which cell transport process will happen and explain to me how and why. Everybody follow me there? Yeah? Okay. And then for active transport, obviously it's active, which means it uses energy, right? It uses energy, okay? It's pumping material where? Usually into the cell. Sometimes it's out of the cell, but most of the time it's into the cell. It's pumping it against the gradient, okay? That means it's taking it from low concentration and sending it to high concentration. The other two do not do that, okay? So from low to high, okay, or against or up the gradient, okay? How does it do that? It's using energy, but what is the energy doing that's allowing that to happen? There was something in the membrane. Anyone remember what they were? Okay, remember what they look like? These things? Yeah? Okay, remember me doing that weak demo? Okay. So they're transport proteins. Okay? There's transport proteins embedded in the membrane. The energy causes the transport proteins to change shape, and the change in shape allows the pumping of solutes across the membrane, right? Usually the things we're transporting by active transport are either too big to move through the membrane, or they're already in high concentration inside and won't move in there by natural processes. Okay, so it's one of the two reasons. Okay, so things to remember about that. Okay, we would probably use that in situations where we needed something really badly in very large amounts inside the cell. Right. So again, that's figure out a situation where active transport would be most valuable or most likely to be used. All right, so like I said, that's the biggest one, okay? I mean, the test is out of what, 80 marks? Something, maybe it's more than 80 marks, somewhere around there, okay? And I'll bet you 25 of them are on that lesson alone. It might even be more than that, okay? There's just so much there about what cells do and about cell transport, okay? Because cell transport, I mean, just asking about cell transport in and of itself is a lot of marks, but are there probably other situations where you could work these ideas into an answer? Okay, there probably are. So it's a big, big deal. Make sure you know how those ones work. Okay, and then after that, what are we on here? 4? 5. Okay, then we talked about cell size. Okay, we talked about surface area to volume. All right, and we kind of already talked about how that relates to diffusion. Okay, so probably understand that relationship a little bit, review that lab, okay, go over your answers to that lab a little bit, because I'll definitely ask something about that, a practical application question. Might be weird, might be a weird one. Okay. I had a moment of inspiration when I came up with that question, so, okay. Yeah, so make sure you cover that one. And then we were pretty much done with cells. Okay, we moved on then to multicellularity. Okay, to be considered truly multicellular, an organism has to show what? Thinking of a long word that starts with S. Specialization, right? Okay, multicellularity. A true multicellular organism has division of labor because of specialization. All right, specialization is the key there. We've got cells that do a certain job, other cells that do a certain job. They are interdependent on one another, right? Okay, what were the advantages? That relates back to this. That's the problem with bio. Everything is connected. Everything is interrelated. Okay? Chemistry and physics are just simple. Okay? It's one thing and then another. Okay, but all of these things can almost always be tied back to each other. right? Multicellularity allowed organisms to become large without having to battle the surface area to volume problem because they were made up of many small cells. That's again what we illustrated with that activity. Multi-micro, the cube made up of all the little cubes, okay, didn't have a surface area to volume ratio problem even though it was as big as the big cube. All right, so things like that are things to consider there. Okay, beyond that, that's probably the biggest thing you need to know about multicellularity. Okay, not so much how it evolved, but more why. Okay. Okay, and then we talked about plant structure. So, roots, stem, leaves, okay, certainly know those, the role each one plays and how it plays it. Okay, so root, stem, and leaves, and then the leaf on its own, okay, leaf structure, so that would be the layers for two reasons. First off, I want you to understand how the leaf works. Palisade layer does photosynthesis, spongy layer holds the gases and water, okay, epidermis secretes the cuticle, right, the stomates, how they work, because leaf structure, all those cells within the leaf were an example of specialization within a multicellular organism. All right, so again, it's an idea or a theme that could come up in more than one kind of question. All right, structure of the leaf is a good example of specialization in a multicellular organism, but I might also ask about it strictly for what do these parts do in a plant? Okay, it might be more about plant structure, or it might be more about specialization. When you read the question, you'll know. Okay, which one am I asking about? Okay, am I going to ask you to label the parts of a leaf? Probably not, but you still need to know what all the parts do. Okay, even if I don't ask you to label them, you need to know them to explain this. Okay, everyone follow? All right, and then after plant structure, we talked about plant transport. I don't know what letter that was going to be. Transport. Okay, what cellular transport process is responsible for transporting water within a plant? Osmosis. Okay, got to be able to explain the process of plant transport, starting with that. Okay, why does that work? Where does it get set up? Okay, osmosis has to do with salts. Where are the salts ending up that they're able to pull water up the tree? Okay, what parts of the tree does the water move through? Okay, make sure you're using all the technical terms. Don't go the water conducting tubes. Okay, I'm probably going to want to hear xylem instead. Okay, things like that. So that's transport of water, but plants also have to transport sugar, and they do that with the phloem. Okay, so make sure you know those. Okay, that's just a fact checker, but there could be some marks about phloem and xylem. Okay, what they transport, where they are. Okay, where's the xylem? Outside or inside? Inside. Phloem's on the outside. Remember, that's what I told you about the ringing of the trees. Okay, right. So things like that are things you would definitely want to study. Okay, and then after that, kind of the last thing was plant growth and development. Okay, so plant growth and development could encompass hormones. And we talked about auxins and cytokinins and gibberellins and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so there could be some fact-checking kind of questions on the exam about what each of those things do. Okay, and tropisms. Now there's only 3 of those. The good news is the mechanics, that is how each of them happens, is exactly the same. Why they happen is different, but how they happen is the same. In order to make a plant curve, what has to happen? It's got to release auxins to grow one side faster than the other, right? There's got to be that differential rate of growth was the term we used in class. Okay, and Make sure you know that this is the primary hormone responsible for that. So a question could be, how does this tropism happen? Or give you a picture and say, here's a plant. Here's the situation it's in. Why is it doing this? What is it called? How does it work? Okay, be able to explain it, apply it to that situation. All right, everybody follow me there? Okay, so make sure in an answer like that, you want to be detailed, right? Oftentimes when I give a question where I'm asking about tropisms and how they happen, people would say something like, phototropism, growth toward light. Okay, it's a 5-mark question. How many marks are you getting for that? 2, you identified it was phototropism and you told me what phototropism is. It's growth towards light. Did you tell me anything about how it happens? Okay, that would be another 2 marks. Okay, why it happens? Plants need light to live. Okay, that makes sugar for them. All right, you got to have, like, those are the things. It's level of detail. Right? If you write 2 things down for a 5-mark question, you really threw away a few marks. Right? So, I guess tip at the end of every question in brackets is the point value for the question. All right, and it's pretty straightforward. I give 1 mark for essentially all of the points that you would need to cover, right? Or it would be identify and explain. So there would be, a mark for identifying and then a mark for explaining, things like that. If it's a 5-mark question, make sure you got 5 marks worth of stuff written down. That said, writing down everything you know, because if you do that, the right answer will be in there somewhere, is also not a strategy to use, okay? Because it's not like I'm going right minus wrong, but I sort of am a little bit, okay? If you're just writing down everything you know, I'll know, and you'll be just like, it'll be guessing, and I can tell the difference, all right? So if you contradict yourself in an answer, you say one thing and then you say the exact opposite in the same answer, then I'm going to know you don't know, okay? Everyone follow me there? Okay, so kind of make sure that you're being aware of that as well, because I do see that happen once in a while. Okay, you kind of got to make a choice, right? That strategy won't work. Okay, wait till you get to university and you find out about real right minus wrong. Okay, I had a multiple choice test that was right minus wrong and multiple choice. So it went like this. Question number 1 was this question, A, B, C, and D. And then underneath that was 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I had to look at options 1 through 4 and then decide for A, B, C, or D, which of 1 through 4 was right so that I could figure out whether I needed to pick A, B, C, or D. Okay, there were 4 statements. Some of them were right, some of them were wrong, and that's the multiple choice part of the multiple part. Okay, and then your final grade was how many right you got minus how many wrong you got. So it wasn't just about how many right you got. It penalized you for guessing. Okay? If you didn't know the answer and you filled in something and you got it wrong, it counted against you. Okay? Yeah. Savage. That was an absolutely savage test. I did not do very well on that test. Okay. All right, so we got tropisms there, and then obviously we've got factors, growth factors. Okay? We did our lab design on the factors affecting plant growth. Okay, so know the resources a plant needs and how it would go about getting them. Maybe a little bit about competition between plants. Okay, what kind of things might they do? Okay, in terms of the stuff we've talked about. Okay, and then the last thing, because this is on every single unit exam in this course, scientific method, right? By that I mean variables, right? Being able to identify manipulated, responding, controlled, but this time in a biology experiment type of context. Okay, we've got to understand how experimental design works. Right? We spend a little bit of time on that in every unit. Okay, in terms of the test, there are 26 multiple choice questions, even though I forgot to change the explanatory paragraph that says this exam contains 25. It's actually 26. So it's 26 multiple choice questions, and there are 9 written response questions. and the 9 written response questions are worth 53 marks in total. Okay, so we're looking at a test that is out of 79. Okay, so in the written response, you know, you got basically the things I've talked about there, stuff about, you know, plants' adaptations for conserving water, okay, plant growth responses, cell structure, specialization, multicellularity, plant transport, cell transport, plant growth and adaptation, cell transport. Okay, so gives you a pretty good idea of what the main focus is here. All right, the multiple choice is a lot of fact checking. Okay, it's a lot of just recall kind of stuff. Okay. When you're writing this exam, keep an eye on the clock. Okay, it's easy to lose track of time when you're writing written response answers. It's not like in chemistry where, you know, okay, well, I got done the balancing and now I'm on to doing this. Okay, as you're writing and explaining stuff, it's easy to kind of second guess yourself and then spend an inadequate amount of time on a test, okay, or spend too much time, I should say, inadequate, just spending too much time on a question because you keep second guessing what you wrote, right? Write your answer, move on. When you're done all of them, then you can go back and second guess yourself, okay? Which, by the way, you shouldn't really do because usually your first thought is your best thought, all right? Okay, questions from you guys? Okay, how many people have started the review package already? Okay, good. All right, so in the review package, okay, just a couple of things here. Obviously, the first part, okay, major concepts, kind of what we went over today, cell size, relationships, cell transport processes, cell structure and function. Okay, now, cell transport processes, remember, we've got the big 3 written here. They're the big ones. They're the written response major concepts. Minor concepts could be the types of endocytosis and exocytosis. Okay, we talked about those, like there was phagocytosis, pinocytosis, and receptor mediated. I'm not going to ask those in a written response, but they are ways that the cell engulfs things. Okay, so there could be something about that maybe in the written or in the multiple choice, I mean. Okay, methods of acquiring energy, that's modes of nutrition, plant structure, function, lab diagrams, mostly again, format, but also estimating the size of an object, transporting plants, okay? Then minor concepts, tropisms, real-world situation of cellular transport, parts of the plant, what they do, okay? Plant behavior, prokaryotes, eukaryotes, you can take that off. Well, I shouldn't say take that off. We did talk about that a little bit. Basically, you just need to know that eukaryotes are the ones that we're looking at, the ones that have actual cell structures within, okay, like the organelles and stuff. Okay, cell theory, and then, okay, we got some example questions here, being asked to label a cell, right? Tell me the parts and what they do. I told you that that's going to be on there, okay? Summarizing the difference between plant and animal cells, so that would be a modes of nutrition and cell structure kind of question. Also a functions, basic functions kind of question. Okay, explain plant hormones, okay, how they could be used to destroy plants. We talked about Agent Orange, okay, in the lesson that day. Major tropisms, okay, which one would be the most important one for a plant and why? The 2 different modes of nutrition is in there again. Okay, expect lots of diagrams. The test I printed in color. Right? There's that many pictures on it, and they're that important. So the test is printed in color, and there are tons of diagrams. Okay, I think there's only 2 questions in the written response out of the 9 that don't have a picture associated with them. All right, and I'll bet you 1 out of every 3 questions, 4 questions in the multiple choice has a picture associated with it. All right, so bio is kind of a very visual science. So expect lots of pictures. Look at your diagrams. You know, look at, if you go on my website, you can look at the real notes, okay, not just the notes package that you got, but the actual notes that I showed up here. Might be worth your while just to, you know, quickly kind of paw through those. Okay, so if we're looking at like lesson 5, membranes and transport, it'll bring up the slides that I actually had up there with all of the diagrams. You don't necessarily have all of those diagrams, so it might be useful to go through those, especially on this particular lesson where there were lots and lots and lots and lots of them. Okay, things like that to consider. Okay, and then these are some, actually this was an exam question at one point, number 7. Okay, but they're practical application kind of questions. They're that thing I was telling you about. You need to know the facts so you can apply them to that situation, explain how they work. Terminology, make sure you obviously know the definitions of things. Number 10, upper limit on size of cell. We said cell size in relation to diffusion was going to be an important concept. Okay. 14 is asking you to draw a lab diagram. Okay, so you know the format there, 3 points of the cell theory. All right, and then you've got your pre-test old exam questions, and the key is on the website as well. All right. Okay. You guys got some time there. Okay, you can work on that review package, and if questions come up, ask, and I'll answer them.